Following reassurances given to concerned family members about their safety protocols, two skilled young adventurers disappeared without explanation during an expedition into Wyoming's remote backcountry territories. For nearly 6 years, the sole evidence of their fate consisted of an eerily pristine campsite that deepened rather than resolved the mystery surrounding their vanishment. Subsequently, an outdoorsman's unexpected discovery in the deep wilderness, a deteriorated bone fragment containing an embedded metallic object, would ultimately reveal the terrifying circumstances that prevented these young women from returning to their families. The GPS tracking device represented a carefully negotiated middle ground, sophisticated technology bridging the divide between adventurous independence and familial concern. This resilient communication device was engineered to monitor locations and, during crisis situations, transmit emergency signals from the planet's most isolated regions. For Margaret Holbrook, this technology represented her sole source of comfort, while her 20-year-old daughter, Sarah Martinez, accompanied by Sarah's closest companion, Emma Chen, undertook a 4-day wilderness expedition through Wyoming's challenging mountain terrain. The morning arrived on Friday, September 7, 2018. The young women should have returned Wednesday evening. Margaret had anticipated receiving communication around 7:30 Wednesday night, their typical enthusiastic recap of trail experiences and memorable moments. However, 7:30 passed without contact. By 10 o'clock, anxiety had begun constricting her chest. Approaching midnight, she found herself restlessly moving through her home, repeatedly dialing both young women's mobile devices, receiving only automated voicemail responses, clear indicators their phones had either lost power or traveled beyond cellular coverage areas. This situation wasn't entirely unexpected given their destination. The region they were exploring was notorious for unreliable cellular service, particularly in valleys and dense forest areas. However, they should have already emerged from the wilderness, returned to their vehicle, and been traveling homeward. By Friday morning, concern had transformed into authentic fear. Margaret contacted Emma's family, discovering they were experiencing identical escalating distress. The decision was unanimous and immediate. Authorities needed to be notified. Margaret accessed her computer, hands trembling slightly while logging into the GPS tracker's monitoring interface. The young adventurers had initially resisted carrying the device. At 20 years old, they considered themselves invulnerable. Experienced outdoors women who had successfully navigated these mountains on multiple previous occasions. They argued surveillance technology was unnecessary and intrusive. However, both families had remained inflexible on this requirement. The device was mandatory, non-negotiable. With evident reluctance, Sarah and Emma had attached the tracker to their equipment. The tracking software loaded onto Margaret's display, revealing a detailed topographical representation of the region. Margaret's attention immediately focused on the most recent location data, the digital trail marking their journey's progress. However, the coordinates hadn't updated. The interface showed a single concentration of data points indicating their planned camping location for Monday night, September 3rd. According to the timestamp data, the device had last transmitted from that position over 72 hours previously. Since Tuesday morning, there had been complete silence, no movement recorded, no manual status updates, and critically, no emergency distress signal had been activated. The motionlessness of that digital indicator felt profoundly threatening. It suggested the tracking device, and potentially the young women themselves, had ceased all movement long before their scheduled return. Official missing persons documentation was filed immediately with county law enforcement. The names Sarah Martinez and Emma Chen entered the system, transforming from beloved individuals into case numbers. To those who knew them personally, they represented vibrant life and unbreakable friendship. Sarah possessed infectious enthusiasm and spontaneity, while Emma provided the grounding influence, methodical, prepared, perpetually optimistic. Both were accomplished outdoor enthusiasts who respected wilderness dangers while pursuing their shared passion for exploration and natural beauty. This specific expedition had generated some parental hesitation. The route they selected was considerably more isolated and demanding than their typical destinations, traversing areas rarely visited by recreational hikers. Nevertheless, they were legal adults who had prepared extensively. They possessed appropriate equipment, substantial experience, and the GPS tracking device for emergencies. As search and rescue teams began mobilizing, investigators started reconstructing the timeline of their final confirmed activities. Margaret Holbrook provided authorities with recent photographs of both young women, desperate to give search teams clear visual references. One particular image proved especially poignant. The photograph captured both women at a breathtaking mountain vista, with expansive wilderness valleys and crystalline alpine waters extending behind them. Emma, dressed in bright orange athletic wear with a matching visor, had raised both arms triumphantly overhead, her expression radiating pure joy. Sarah, wearing vivid purple hiking attire and a backwards black cap, was making a playful expression while embracing Emma closely. They emanated happiness and freedom, the embodiment of youthful adventure and friendship. Margaret confirmed she had taken this photograph just 6 days earlier on August 29, 2018. She had accompanied them on a preparatory day trek in the general area, a final shared experience before their independent journey. As search and rescue helicopters began their rhythmic journey toward the last known coordinates, that image of unbridled happiness stood in stark contrast to the mounting dread enveloping the mountains. The GPS coordinates directed search teams into designated wilderness territory. This wasn't recreational hiking terrain. These were demanding, unforgiving landscapes, characterized by vertical granite faces, dense coniferous forests, and unstable talus fields that could shift dangerously without warning. The atmosphere was thin at these elevations, and weather patterns changed rapidly and unpredictably. For the search teams, reaching the last known position required exhausting effort undertaken with urgent determination. They understood that in wilderness environments, time was their enemy. Each passing hour reduced survival probability. Upon reaching the coordinates late Friday afternoon, teams discovered exactly what the digital data had indicated: an established campsite. However, the scene they encountered didn't provide anticipated clarity. Instead, it introduced deeply disturbing questions that complicated rather than resolved the mystery. The location was a small natural clearing adjacent to a mountain stream, the type of site experienced backpackers would naturally select. Their lightweight 3-person tent remained properly erected and securely closed. A fire ring showed no recent use, indicating no fire had burned for multiple days. Throughout the immediate area, equipment was visible, but not merely some equipment. Nearly everything was present. 2 distinctive dark green backpacks, identical to those visible in Margaret's photograph, were positioned against a fallen log, apparently packed and ready for travel. Inside the tent, investigators discovered sleeping bags properly stored, clothing organized systematically, and food supplies completely untouched. Water purification systems, medical supplies, illumination devices, all essential wilderness survival tools were present and accounted for. Positioned prominently on a flat boulder near the extinguished fire ring was the GPS tracker. The device remained powered and functional, its indicator light pulsing steadily, but it hadn't moved since its last transmission. The scene's normalcy made it profoundly puzzling. No evidence suggested violence or struggle. The ground showed no signs of confrontation or hasty departure. No blood was visible, no equipment was damaged, no indications of wildlife encounter existed. The campsite appeared meticulously maintained, with food properly secured in anti-bear containers, demonstrating the women had followed proper wilderness protocols. The scene suggested, impossibly, that Sarah and Emma had simply risen from their position and walked away from camp, abandoning everything necessary for survival. This scenario immediately presented investigators with an agonizing question: why? What circumstances would compel 2 intelligent, experienced wilderness travelers who understood environmental dangers to abandon their campsite without any supplies? Why leave behind food, water purification, and most critically, their sole communication link to civilization? This behavior contradicted everything known about their training, experience, and personalities. The abandoned campsite discovery triggered massive escalation of search operations. Initial teams were rapidly supplemented with additional ground personnel, specialized canine units, and aerial support assets. The operation's scale was immense, covering miles of extraordinarily challenging terrain, radiating outward from the campsite location. Helicopters flew systematic patterns at low altitude, scanning slopes and valleys, while ground teams methodically searched through dense vegetation and rocky outcroppings. Margaret Holbrook, alongside Emma's parents, maintained continuous presence at the Search and Rescue Command post established at the primary trailhead. The atmosphere combined intense professional focus with profound human empathy. Margaret particularly displayed relentless determination, persistently requesting updates from incident commanders, suggesting potential destinations, desperately contributing any information that might assist recovery efforts. At the campsite, forensic specialists began meticulous examination of abandoned items, seeking any evidence, however minor, that might explain the women's disappearance. They documented every object with extraordinary care, photographing, cataloging, and analyzing for potential clues. Physical evidence yielded minimal immediate insights. However, among personal effects discovered within the tent, one item stood out as potentially significant, not because it suggested foul play, but because it offered possible insight into their intentions. Investigators discovered a specialized botanical field guide focused on high-altitude plant species, a detailed scientific reference for identifying rare flora found in alpine environments. This wasn't a standard hiking guidebook, but rather an academic text focused on specific botanical specimens. Within the guide, multiple pages had been carefully marked with colorful adhesive tabs. These marked sections detailed particular species of rare wildflowers known to bloom exclusively during brief late summer periods and only at elevations above the campsite location. This discovery offered investigators their first concrete theory. The evidence suggested Sarah and Emma might have planned a brief excursion from camp, perhaps ascending a nearby ridge to search for these specific botanical specimens. If they intended to explore higher elevations seeking these rare flowers, it would explain why they hadn't carried their heavy backpacks. They might have assumed the excursion would be brief, perhaps lasting only a few hours. This theory explained the abandoned equipment, but didn't clarify why they never returned. A short botanical hike shouldn't have resulted in complete disappearance. Even if they had become disoriented or injured, their proximity to camp should have facilitated quick discovery. The search continued for days, extending into weeks. Efforts concentrated on areas indicated in the botanical guide, higher elevations and ridgelines surrounding the campsite. The terrain proved treacherous, with searchers navigating steep granite faces, unstable scree fields, and dense Kromholz vegetation. Despite exhaustive efforts, they found nothing. No discarded water bottles, no fabric caught on branches, no footprints departing the immediate camp vicinity. The mountain appeared to have completely erased any trace of their passage. As the investigation progressed, public pressure intensified. Tips and reported sightings began flooding the command center. One report particularly captured investigators' attention and diverted significant resources. A gas station proprietor in a small community approximately 40 miles from the trailhead contacted authorities claiming to have observed two young women matching Sarah and Emma's descriptions on Tuesday afternoon, September 4th, the day they likely vanished from camp. He reported the women appeared distressed and were observed arguing near an aging, rust-covered pickup truck in the station's parking area. This lead received serious consideration. It suggested the possibility that both women had successfully exited the wilderness but encountered someone dangerous afterward. Investigators invested considerable time verifying the station owner's account, reviewing surveillance footage, and attempting to identify the vehicle. Margaret and Emma's family waited in agonizing suspension, hoping for breakthrough developments. However, after thorough investigation, the lead collapsed entirely. The women observed arguing were eventually identified as unrelated hikers, passing through the area simultaneously. Another dead end, another frustrating diversion consuming valuable investigative resources. By mid-October, high country weather began deteriorating. Days shortened dramatically, nights became frigid, and early winter storms threatened. The massive search operation, which had involved hundreds of personnel and countless resources, was reluctantly suspended. The active search was officially terminated. The complete absence of any trace of Sarah Martinez and Emma Chen left investigators bewildered, and families devastated. The wilderness had claimed them completely, leaving no evidence of their fate. The case of the missing hikers, marked by their mysteriously abandoned campsite, began its transition into cold case files. Nearly 6 years passed. 6 summers when snow melted, revealing alpine meadows. 6 winters when the high country lay buried under deep snow accumulation. The disappearance of Sarah Martinez and Emma Chen had evolved into regional folklore, a cautionary narrative shared among outdoor enthusiasts and local communities. Initial media attention had long since dissipated, replaced by the quiet, persistent anguish of families denied closure. For Margaret Holbrook, time's passage brought no resolution. She refused to allow the case to fade completely. She organized numerous private search efforts, hiring specialized tracking teams and wilderness experts to explore areas potentially overlooked during official searches. Every effort produced identical results: nothing. The mountains revealed no secrets. Summer 2024 arrived with unusual warmth. In early September, during peak hunting season, Marcus Torres was tracking a large bull elk through extremely remote forest sections. Marcus was an experienced outdoorsman in his early 60s, a long-time resident who knew these mountains intimately through decades of hunting and exploration. This particular area lay far from established trails, miles beyond the original 2018 search grid, where Sarah and Emma had vanished. The terrain consisted of ancient forest growth, precipitous ravines, and extremely limited access, regions where human presence was virtually unknown. Marcus was accompanied by his trained tracking dog, a German short-haired pointer named Scout. They had been moving deliberately through thick undergrowth for hours. The air carried the scent of pine resin and decomposing vegetation. As they navigated through particularly dense forest section, Scout suddenly abandoned the elk trail. The dog became highly agitated, whimpering and frantically investigating the ground with unusual intensity. Marcus observed, initially assuming Scout had detected smaller game scent. However, Scout's behavior was atypical. Not tracking behavior, but intense focus on a single location near an enormous fallen tree, likely toppled by storms years earlier. Its massive root system exposed to elements. Scout began digging furiously, sending soil and forest debris flying. Marcus called him back, but the dog ignored commands, completely consumed by whatever scent he had detected. Marcus approached to investigate, expecting to find an animal den or burrow. After several minutes of intense excavation, Scout extracted something from the disturbed earth. He returned to Marcus, dropping the object at his feet. Marcus looked down, expecting to see a stick or perhaps scavenged animal remains. What he saw made his blood freeze. It was indeed bone, but unmistakably human. Weather-worn and soil-stained dark brown, but the anatomical structure was undeniable. A human femur, a thigh bone. Marcus stood paralyzed, staring at the discovery. The forest's ambient sounds suddenly felt oppressive and threatening. Throughout his life in these mountains, encountering countless animal remains, he had never discovered human bones. The realization struck with physical force. He secured Scout, who remained agitated and eager to return to the excavation site. Marcus's heart pounded heavily. He knew further investigation was necessary. He approached the fallen tree cautiously, his lifetime of wilderness experience taking control. The ground where Scout had been digging was disturbed, dark soil contrasting with surrounding forest floor. He knelt carefully, using a sturdy branch to carefully clear away additional dirt and debris. Almost immediately, he uncovered additional bones. They were scattered and fragmentary, suggesting extended burial and possible animal disturbance. He identified vertebrae, rib fragments, and portions of arm bones. Then he made the discovery that transformed everything. Carefully brushing away compressed soil and pine needles, he revealed a section of human spinal column, several vertebrae still connected by desiccated tissue. But the bones themselves weren't what caused Marcus to recoil in horror. Embedded violently between 2 vertebrae was a corroded, crudely constructed arrowhead. The sight was chilling beyond description. The metal showed extensive corrosion, dark brown and orange from oxidation, but its shape remained distinct, a flat triangular head with pronounced barbs designed to prevent extraction. The arrow shaft had broken away, leaving only the lethal head buried deep within bone tissue. The implications were immediate and horrifying. This wasn't accidental death or environmental exposure. This was homicide, and the weapon was unlike anything Marcus had encountered in modern context. Marcus stood slowly, his mind racing. He was deep in wilderness, miles from cellular coverage. He understood he needed to report this immediately, but also recognized he couldn't leave remains exposed to elements. He made a difficult decision. He carefully wrapped the spine segment containing the embedded arrowhead in spare clothing from his pack, securing it safely. He then covered remaining bones with branches and forest debris, concealing the site as thoroughly as possible. He marked the precise location on his GPS device, recording exact coordinates of the burial site. He knew he needed to reach communication quickly. He recalled a Forest Service cabin approximately 6 miles distant, equipped with emergency radio equipment. The journey was tense and urgent. Marcus felt the weight of the spine segment in his pack, a gruesome burden demanding justice. He couldn't stop contemplating the arrowhead, its primitive design suggesting a narrative far more complex and sinister than he could comprehend. After several hours of difficult hiking, he reached the cabin. He accessed the emergency radio, waiting impatiently for connection. Before making contact, he removed the spine segment from his pack and placed it on the cabin's wooden table. The artificial lighting highlighted bone texture and corroded metal with stark clarity. He photographed the evidence multiple times with his digital camera, ensuring documentation existed. Then, taking a deep breath, he contacted State Police Dispatch. He explained the situation, his voice strained but controlled, providing photographs and precise burial site coordinates. He described the femur, the scattered remains, and the arrowhead embedded in the spine. Authorities on the radio mobilized immediately, assembling teams of investigators and forensic specialists. For the first time in nearly 6 years, there was a potential breakthrough. But the nature of this discovery suggested answers would be darker than anyone had imagined. The coordinates provided by Marcus Torres directed investigators into wilderness sections requiring hours of challenging navigation. The atmosphere among the response team was somber and focused. They understood they were approaching a crime scene that had remained hidden for years. The location's remoteness underscored the chilling reality that whoever had buried these remains had intended them never to be discovered. Upon arrival, the team immediately established a secure perimeter. The scene matched Marcus's description precisely: the massive fallen tree, the disturbed earth, and the scattered skeletal remains. Investigators began the meticulous process of documenting everything, photographing every detail, before any evidence was moved. The excavation proceeded with archaeological precision. Remains were incomplete and scattered, indicating significant environmental exposure and animal activity over the years. Bones were carefully collected, catalogued, and prepared for transport. The spine segment with embedded arrowhead, which Marcus had provided to first responders, was treated with exceptional care, recognized as crucial evidence. Remains were transported to the State Forensic Laboratory, where identification process began. Initial analysis proved challenging. Bones were weathered and degraded, making DNA extraction difficult. No surgical implants or distinctive medical devices provided quick identification. Initial attempts at matching remains to missing persons databases failed. Frustration among investigators was palpable. They had discovered human remains, undeniable evidence of murder, but couldn't identify the victim. The possibility that this discovery was unrelated to Sarah and Emma's disappearance loomed, a prospect that would only deepen the mystery. While forensic anthropologists worked on identification, investigation focus shifted to the weapon. The arrowhead embedded in the spine was highly unusual, a bizarre anomaly in contemporary crime. It was sent to specialists in metallurgy and archaeological analysis. Results were startling. The arrowhead wasn't modern hunting equipment. It was iron, heavily corroded with archaic design. Experts identified it as a replica frontier-style or pseudo-historical arrowhead, the type often crafted by hobbyists or historical reenactors. Crude construction but lethally effective, this discovery fundamentally transformed the investigation's nature. It suggested a killer who utilized primitive weapons, someone with specialized skills and perhaps disturbing historical fascinations. Using such a weapon felt deeply personal and profoundly violent. It raised questions about motivation. Why use arrows when firearms would be more efficient? The investigation stalled, caught between identification difficulties and weapon strangeness. Detective Riley Morrison, the seasoned investigator assigned to this cold case, realized they needed additional evidence from the burial site. She ordered meticulous secondary grid search of surrounding area, expanding search perimeter, further into dense forest. During this expanded search, the breakthrough they desperately needed finally arrived. Embedded within the complex root system of a nearby tree, concealed beneath years of accumulated forest debris, investigators discovered skull fragments and a partial mandible. These new findings were rushed to the forensic laboratory. The presence of jawbone and teeth offered new identification avenue: dental records. The forensic odontologist began painstaking reconstruction of the partial mandible, comparing teeth to dental records of known missing persons. The process was slow, requiring comparison of X-rays, fillings, and unique dental characteristics. After days of intensive analysis, positive identification was achieved. The remains belonged to Emma Chen. The identification struck the investigative team and families with devastating force. After nearly 6 years of uncertainty, they finally had an answer regarding Emma's fate. But the answer was horrific. She hadn't died from accident or exposure. She had been murdered, shot in the back with an archaic weapon, buried in a shallow wilderness grave. Margaret Holbrook and the Chen family were devastated. Confirmation of Emma's death extinguished the last hope that she might somehow still be alive. Grief was overwhelming, compounded by the violence of her death. But discovery also raised an agonizing new question. Where was Sarah Martinez? The burial site excavation had been exhaustive. Forensic experts were confident remains found belonged to a single individual. There was absolutely no trace of Sarah at the scene. No clothing, no personal items, no DNA evidence. Sarah's absence presented terrifying possibilities. Had she met the same fate as Emma, her body buried elsewhere in vast wilderness? Or impossibly, had she somehow survived the attack? Had she witnessed her best friend's murder and managed to escape? The investigation now faced dual challenges: identifying the killer responsible for Emma's murder and locating Sarah. The discovery of Emma's remains had closed one chapter of the mystery while opening another. The archaic arrowhead, once a bizarre anomaly, now became key to unlocking the identity of a killer who had evaded justice for nearly 6 years. Investigation turned toward finding individuals known to possess and utilize such unusual weapons, a search that would lead them into Wyoming wilderness's darkest corners and society's fringes. The identification of Emma Chen and the nature of her death energized the investigation with new urgency. It was now officially homicide. Detective Riley Morrison, known for solving complex cold cases, assumed leadership. Her immediate focus centered on the weapon. The frontier-style arrowhead was their most distinctive evidence, and Morrison believed it held the key to identifying the killer. Investigation shifted toward identifying individuals or groups known to utilize primitive weapons in Wyoming's rugged mountain regions. This search led them to specific subcultures: survivalists, primitive skills practitioners, and those living off-grid lifestyles. Morrison's team began researching local groups known for self-sufficiency and government distrust. Their attention soon focused on a specific community, a reclusive anti-establishment collective living on an isolated compound deep in the region. This group was known for practicing traditional hunting techniques, including forging and utilizing handmade weapons. They maintained notorious hostility toward outsiders, with documented history of conflicts with law enforcement and federal land management agencies. The group became primary investigation focus. The theory seemed plausible. Perhaps Emma and Sarah had inadvertently entered the group's territory or encountered members while hiking, leading to violent confrontation. Morrison began investigating the group's history, searching for connections to areas where Emma's remains were discovered. She uncovered that the group had been subjects of multiple investigations over years, primarily related to illegal hunting and unauthorized federal land use. One incident particularly captured her attention. In 2016, several years before the disappearance, federal wildlife officers and land management authorities had conducted a raid on the group's compound regarding allegations. of poaching protected species and illegal wilderness structures. The raid had been contentious, resulting in multiple arrests and confiscation of numerous weapons. As Morrison reviewed records from the 2016 raid, she focused on inventory of confiscated items. The list included firearms, but also significant numbers of handmade bows and arrows, described in reports as primitive and frontier style. The connection was electrifying. The murder weapon matched descriptions of weapons confiscated from the group. Suspicion immediately focused on group members known for expertise in primitive archery. One individual particularly emerged as prime suspect, Clayton Briggs. Briggs was a senior group member in his late 50s, known for virulent anti-government rhetoric and hostility toward authorities. He was expert tracker and hunter. Crucially, Morrison discovered that Briggs held hunting permits, since expired, for specific areas where Emma's remains were discovered. Circumstantial evidence against Briggs was compelling. He possessed means and opportunity. Investigation focused on building a case against him. In spring 2025, armed with search warrants, authorities executed a raid on the survivalist compound. The operation was high risk, given the group's known hostility and weapons access. Tactical teams moved quickly, securing the compound and detaining residents. Atmosphere was tense. The compound consisted of crude cabins and workshops surrounded by dense forest. Residents were defiant and uncooperative, viewing the raid as another example of government persecution. During meticulous compound search, investigators discovered exactly what they sought. In one workshop, they found forging equipment, arrowhead-making tools, and several completed arrows. These arrows were identical in style to the murder weapon found embedded in Emma's spine. The discovery seemed to confirm suspicions. They had found the weapon's source. Clayton Briggs was arrested and brought for questioning. The interrogation room was small and sterile, stark contrast to the rugged environment he was accustomed to. Morrison led the interrogation, presenting evidence methodically. The arrowhead matching arrows found on compound, and Briggs's hunting permits for the area. Briggs was defiant, a large man weathered by outdoor living, radiating hostility. He refused to answer questions, responding only with anti-establishment diatribes and persecution accusations. Morrison pressed him, focusing on the arrows. She demanded to know if Briggs recognized the murder weapon. Briggs finally broke his silence, but his response wasn't what Morrison expected. He didn't confess, he counterattacked. He vehemently denied involvement in the disappearance or murder. He claimed the group was being framed, then dropped shocking information. Briggs insisted arrows found in Emma's spine weren't his. He claimed during the 2016 raid, authorities had confiscated dozens of handmade bows and arrows, including specific frontier-style arrowheads they were now accusing him of using. He claimed those confiscated arrows were never returned. He accused authorities of taking arrows from government custody and using them to frame him and his community. The claim seemed outlandish, but introduced disturbing ambiguity into the investigation. Briggs's alibi for September 2018 was difficult to verify given the community's isolated nature and refusal to cooperate. But the case against him remained circumstantial. They couldn't definitively prove Briggs possessed the specific murder weapon in 2018. Morrison was frustrated. Briggs was a plausible suspect, but his claim about confiscated arrows couldn't be ignored. If there was truth to it, the murder weapon might have originated from an entirely different source. Investigations stalled, caught in a web of accusations and uncertainty. Focus shifted from survivalist compound to internal records of authorities themselves. Morrison needed to know what happened to those confiscated arrows. She ordered full audit of federal evidence storage, where items confiscated during 2016 raid were originally stored. The evidence storage was a secure facility, governed by strict protocols for managing and tracking evidence. The audit involved reviewing years of logs, inventories, and chain of custody documents. It was a painstaking process, requiring meticulous attention to detail. Morrison assigned a team of forensic accountants and internal affairs investigators to conduct audit. They spent weeks examining records, cross-referencing 2016 raid inventory with current storage inventory. Records were disorganized and incomplete, reflecting years of bureaucratic inefficiency and inconsistent management. But as auditors dug deeper, They began uncovering significant irregularities in evidence logs related to confiscated arrows. Then they found the discrepancy. Records confirmed confiscated arrows, dozens matching murder weapon description, had indeed been stored in evidence facility following 2016 raid. But they were no longer there. Auditors traced chain of custody, searching for documentation explaining arrows' location. They found what they sought in logs from summer 2018. Records showed confiscated arrows were checked out of storage on August 10, 2018. Just 3 weeks before Sarah and Emma disappeared, discovery was electrifying. Timing was too precise for coincidence. Murder weapon had been in authorities' custody and went missing just weeks before murder. Morrison reviewed checkout log personally, eyes scanning entry details, searching for reason arrows had been removed from storage. The justification cited was innocuous, materials needed for educational display on historical hunting techniques. This explanation seemed plausible, but logs also showed items were never returned. They had simply vanished from system. Morrison's focus shifted to name on checkout log. The person who signed out arrows was a forest ranger. The name was Trevor Caldwell. The revelation struck Morrison like lightning. A forest ranger, someone entrusted with protecting wilderness and visitors. Implications were staggering. Morrison immediately ordered background check on Trevor Caldwell. Results were unsettlingly normal. Caldwell remained active ranger, highly respected with immaculate service records spanning over 15 years. He was known for extensive wilderness knowledge, dedication to duty, and quiet professional demeanor. Morrison reviewed Caldwell's personnel file, searching for red flags, disciplinary actions, any instability indication. There was nothing. Caldwell was model employee, but background check revealed crucial detail. Trevor Caldwell had been involved in initial 2018 search operation for missing women. He had been among first responders at scene, involved in abandoned campsite, search and subsequent massive search effort. The fact that Caldwell acquired weapons shortly before disappearance, then participated in victim search, immediately shifted investigation focus. The possibility that a forest ranger, someone who knew wilderness intimately and had access to confiscated weapons, was involved in murder was chilling prospect. Morrison knew they had to proceed with extreme caution. Accusing respected forest ranger of murder was high-stakes move requiring irrefutable evidence. Investigation entered new dangerous phase. Focus shifted from society's fringes to establishment's heart. Realization that killer might have been hiding in plain sight, embedded within the organization, tasked with protecting wilderness, cast dark shadow over entire investigation. Morrison knew if Caldwell was the killer, he was a predator who used his position and wilderness knowledge to hunt victims. Investigation turned toward uncovering secrets hidden behind respected forest ranger's facade. The discovery of Trevor Caldwell's name on evidence checkout log fundamentally altered investigation trajectory. Detective Morrison understood the gravity. Caldwell was respected forest ranger, with intimate terrain knowledge and agency inner workings. They needed to build case meticulously. Authorities placed Caldwell under discreet surveillance. Goal was observing behavior and gathering evidence without alerting him to suspicion. Surveillance operation was challenging given Caldwell's park familiarity and training. Surveillance teams observed Caldwell for weeks. His behavior appeared normal, adhering to routine patrols and duties. But as surveillance continued, they noticed anomalies. Caldwell was making long, seemingly unauthorized trips into extremely remote park sections during patrols, areas far from established trails or interest points. He would disappear for hours, movements difficult to track in dense wilderness. While surveillance continued, Morrison decided reviewing old case files from 2018 investigation, searching for prior connection between Caldwell and victims. She focused on days preceding disappearance, specifically the preparatory hike the women took with Margaret Holbrook 5 days before vanishing. Morrison remembered that preparatory hike started at Park Visitor Center. She requested security footage from Visitor Center for that day, August 29, 2018. Footage was grainy and low resolution, typical of period technology, but still viewable. Morrison spent hours reviewing footage, watching visitors coming and going. She focused on time when Margaret, Sarah, and Emma were known present at center. Then she saw it. In background of one shot near topographical maps display, she spotted figure in ranger uniform. Figure was partially obscured but profile recognizable, Trevor Caldwell. He stood motionless, apparently observing Sarah and Margaret reviewing maps. He remained there several minutes, attention focused on them before moving out of frame. Observation was subtle, but in investigation context, deeply disturbing. It suggested Caldwell might have noticed women days before disappearance, might have been stalking them, planning attack. Armed with evidence log discrepancy and CCTV footage, Morrison decided confronting Caldwell. Authorities brought him for questioning under guise of routine 2018 search operation review. Interrogation began casually. Caldwell was calm and cooperative, recounting search involvement with professional detachment. But as Morrison shifted focus to confiscated arrows and evidence log, Caldwell's demeanor changed. When confronted with checkout log bearing his signature, Caldwell visibly tensed. His calm facade cracked. He stumbled over words, offering rambling explanation about educational display, claiming he simply forgot returning arrows. Morrison pressed him, pointing out checkout timing just weeks before disappearance. Caldwell's composure evaporated. He immediately stopped talking and requested lawyer. Interrogation ended, but Morrison had what she needed. Caldwell's reaction confirmed suspicions. They now had probable cause for search warrant on his residence. Caldwell lived in secluded house on Park's Edge, remote property surrounded by dense forest. Location's isolation underscored chilling possibility he could have conducted horrific activities without detection. Investigators executed emergency search warrant on property. Tactical teams moved quickly, securing house and surrounding area. House search revealed nothing incriminating. Neat and organized home of solitary man. But search wasn't over. Property included detached workshop, large sturdy building for storing equipment and tools. Investigators focused attention on this structure. Workshop was cluttered but organized, but as investigators meticulously searched space, they noticed something unusual about workbench. It was heavy, seemed fixed to floor. They managed moving workbench, revealing concealed reinforced cellar door hidden beneath. Discovery sent adrenaline wave through investigative team. Cellar door was locked, secured with heavy-duty padlock. They broke lock and opened door, revealing stairs descending into darkness. Air emanating from cellar was cold and stale, carrying damp earth scent and something else, something indescribable but profoundly unsettling. Investigators descended stairs, flashlights cutting through darkness. What they found was nightmare incarnate. Cellar was small, roughly 12 feet square. It was soundproofed, walls lined with thick insulation material. Space was dimly lit by single bare bulb, showing clear evidence of long-term human habitation. Small cot in corner covered with soiled bedding. Bucket in opposite corner served as toilet. But other details revealed true horror. Heavy metal restraints bolted to walls and floor. Signs of prolonged struggle, scratches on walls, dark stains on floor. Investigators collected stain samples suspecting blood. Evidence suggested severe, prolonged abuse. Cellar atmosphere was oppressive, heavy with suffering weight that had occurred there. Realization struck investigators with devastating force. This was where he kept her. Investigation focus shifted to surrounding property. If Caldwell held someone captive in cellar, where were they now? Following tracks leading from workshop into deep woods behind property, cadaver dogs were brought to search area. Dogs moved quickly, sniffing ground intensely. After short search, one dog alerted near shallow depression, whining and refusing to move. Investigators secured area and began excavation. Digging was slow and careful, tension mounting with every shovelful of earth removed. They didn't need to dig deep. About 3 feet down, they uncovered human remains. Remains were quickly identified. They belonged to Sarah Martinez. Discovery was heartbreaking. After nearly 6 years, Sarah had finally been found. But discovery circumstances were horrific. Forensic analysis of Sarah's remains revealed truth far more devastating than imagined. Her death occurred significantly later than Emma's. Forensic pathologist estimated death time around late 2023 or early 2024. The timeline was agonizing. Sarah had been held captive by Caldwell for approximately 5 years after Emma was murdered. The realization shattered the investigative team and families. While searches had ceased, while the world had continued forward, Sarah had been alive, enduring unimaginable horrors in that dark cellar. The knowledge that she could have been rescued, that she had survived years of captivity, was a burden that would haunt everyone involved in the case forever. The wilderness had concealed a monster, a predator who exploited his uniform and wilderness knowledge to perpetrate crimes of unimaginable cruelty. The discovery of the hidden cellar and Sarah Martinez's remains broke the case wide open. Evidence against Trevor Caldwell was overwhelming, painting a horrific picture of premeditated murder, kidnapping, and prolonged torture. Caldwell was arrested and charged with kidnapping and murders of both Emma Chen and Sarah Martinez, along with numerous charges related to long-term abuse and captivity of Sarah. With Caldwell in custody, investigators could piece together the terrifying sequence of events leading to tragedy. The theory investigators developed was chilling in its calculated malevolence. Investigators concluded Caldwell had first noticed the women during their preparatory hike with Margaret Holbrook, 5 days before disappearance. CCTV footage from Visitor Center suggested he had observed them, perhaps becoming obsessed, and began planning his attack. He utilized expert park knowledge to track them to remote campsite. Authorities believe he ambushed them morning of Tuesday, September 4, 2018. Exact attack details remained unknown, but evidence suggested Emma resisted and was killed immediately, shot in back with archaic arrow. Caldwell then abducted Sarah, forcing her to leave campsite without supplies, explaining the eerie stillness of abandoned camp. He transported her to his secluded residence, imprisoning her in soundproofed cellar. Using arrows stolen from evidence locker was calculated move designed to misdirect future investigation. Caldwell knew about survivalist group and their history of authority conflicts. He used frontier-style arrowheads specifically to frame them, banking on existing distrust between group and law enforcement. He buried Emma's body deep in wilderness miles from campsite, an area he knew was rarely visited. For 5 years, Caldwell held Sarah captive, subjecting her to unimaginable abuse while continuing work as respected forest ranger, concealing his monstrous secret in plain sight. Reasons for her eventual death remained unclear, whether he killed her intentionally or she succumbed to prolonged abuse. Throughout legal proceedings, Caldwell remained silent. He refused confession, never explaining motives, never offering details about attack or years of Sarah's captivity. He offered no apology, no remorse. Despite his silence, evidence against him was insurmountable. The trial was a harrowing experience, forcing families to confront horrific crime details. In late 2025, Trevor Caldwell was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to multiple life terms without possibility of parole, ensuring he would die in prison. For Margaret Holbrook, case resolution brought no peace, only profound, agonizing loss. Knowledge that her daughter had been alive for years while search had ceased, suffering in darkness just miles away, was torment that would never fade. The case of missing hikers, which began with image of youthful joy and adventure, ended in revelation of unimaginable horror, stark reminder of darkness that can hide beneath surface of most beautiful landscapes. The Wyoming wilderness had returned to its eternal rhythm of seasons, but for those touched by this tragedy, the mountains would forever carry the weight of unspeakable loss. The story serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers come not from nature's harsh elements, but from those who walk among us wearing masks of normalcy while harboring darkness beyond comprehension. This case fundamentally changed how missing persons investigations are conducted in wilderness areas. New protocols were established, requiring more thorough background checks on all personnel with evidence access. GPS tracking technology became mandatory for all wilderness excursions in the region. The families established foundations in Sarah and Emma's names, dedicated to improving wilderness safety and supporting families of missing persons. Margaret Holbrook continues advocating for missing persons awareness, transforming her grief into action, helping other families navigate similar nightmares. She frequently speaks at wilderness safety seminars, sharing her daughter's story as cautionary tale about trusting those in authority positions too readily. The compound where the survivalist group resided was eventually disbanded. its members relocating to other regions. Clayton Briggs, though cleared of involvement in the murders, never recovered from accusations. He passed away in 2026, maintaining his innocence until the end. Marcus Torres, the hunter who discovered the remains, struggled with the weight of his discovery. He ceased hunting altogether, unable to return to the wilderness without remembering that moment when Scout uncovered the bones. He now works with search and rescue teams, using his tracking expertise to help find missing persons. The Forest Service implemented comprehensive reforms following the case. All evidence storage facilities underwent complete audits, with new digital tracking systems, preventing unauthorized removal of items. Background checks for ranger positions became more rigorous, including psychological evaluations and regular monitoring. The cellar beneath Caldwell's workshop was sealed permanently after forensic investigation concluded. The property was eventually demolished, the land returning to wilderness. Nature slowly reclaimed the site, erasing physical evidence of the horrors that occurred there, though the psychological scars remain indelible for all who knew the truth. Detective Riley Morrison received commendations for solving the case, but the victory felt hollow. She continues working cold cases, driven by the knowledge that other families wait for answers, that other predators might be hiding behind facades of respectability. The Caldwell case taught her that evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it wears a uniform and speaks with authority's voice. The botanical guide that provided the initial theory about the women's intentions was returned to Sarah's family. Margaret keeps it displayed in her home, a bittersweet reminder of her daughter's curiosity about nature, her desire to discover beauty in the world, a desire that ultimately led her into the path of unimaginable evil. In the years following the trial, several other cold cases were reopened, examining whether Caldwell might have been involved in other disappearances. Though no additional victims were definitively linked to him, the possibility remains that Sarah and Emma weren't his only victims, that other secrets might still be buried in Wyoming's vast wilderness. The GPS tracker that had been their lifeline, the device that should have saved them, sits in evidence storage, a testament to technology's limitations when confronted with human evil. It had functioned perfectly, transmitting their location faithfully, but it couldn't protect them from someone who knew exactly how to exploit its weaknesses. Local hiking communities established buddy systems and check-in protocols, ensuring no one ventures into remote areas without multiple people knowing their exact plans. Trail cameras were installed at key wilderness entry points, creating a network of surveillance aimed at preventing future tragedies. The case files, spanning thousands of pages of documentation, photographs, and evidence, were digitized and made available to law enforcement training programs. The investigation's failures and eventual success became teaching tools, helping future investigators recognize signs they might otherwise miss. Psychological studies were conducted on the case, examining how someone like Caldwell could maintain such a complete double life, how he could function normally in society while perpetrating such horrors. The research contributed to evolving understanding of predatory behavior and the masks worn by those who walk among us, harboring terrible secrets. The mountains themselves remain unchanged, their ancient peaks indifferent to human tragedy. Hikers still traverse the trails, though many now carry multiple communication devices, share their locations constantly, and maintain heightened awareness of their surroundings. The beauty that draws people to these wild places persists, but it's now tempered with understanding that danger might come not from the wilderness itself, but from those who claim to protect it. The stream near where the original campsite was located continues flowing, its waters carrying no memory of the horror that unfolded on its banks. New growth has covered the areas where searches were conducted, nature's resilience erasing the physical signs of the massive investigation, while the emotional wounds remain raw for those who remember. Each year, on the anniversary of their disappearance, Margaret Holbrook returns to the trailhead where she last saw her daughter begin that fateful hike. She doesn't venture into the wilderness. She can't bring herself to enter those woods. Instead, she stands at the threshold between civilization and wild country, remembering the vibrant young woman who walked into those mountains with such joy and never truly returned. The photograph that captured Sarah and Emma at the mountain overlook, their faces radiant with happiness and adventure, became iconic, not as a celebration of youth and friendship, but as a haunting reminder of lives cut short, of potential destroyed by calculating evil. It serves as both memorial and warning, ensuring their story continues to be told, continues to remind us that sometimes the greatest threats come from those we trust most. If you found this investigation compelling, share your thoughts below. Have you experienced anything unsettling in remote wilderness areas? What precautions do you take when venturing into isolated locations? Your insights and experiences help us understand these tragic cases better and might help prevent future tragedies. Subscribe for more in-depth investigations into solved and unsolved cases. Remember, vigilance and preparation are your best defenses against those who would do harm. Stay safe, stay aware, and always trust your instincts when something feels wrong.